Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Get ready for another incredible story. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin the midday sun beat down on Captain James Carter as he stood motionless on the cracked sidewalk, staring at what used to be his home. 2 years had passed since he'd last seen the white two-story colonial with its black shutters and wraparound porch. The lawn, once his pride and joy, now sprouted patches of weeds between withered grass. A strange car sat in the driveway, a sleek black Mercedes that screamed of money and status. His weathered duffel bag weighed heavy on his shoulder, filled with a few possessions he managed to keep. During his captivity, his military uniform perfectly pressed, despite the long journey home felt foreign against his skin after months of prison rags. The scars beneath the fabric told stories. He wasn't ready to share stories of endless interrogations, of resistance, of survival. Jim ran calloused hand across his jaw, feeling the rough stubble that had replaced his once regulation haircut. The morning's attempt to make himself presentable in a gas station bathroom seemed futile. Now the face that had stared back at him in that streak mirror belonged to a harder man than the one who'd left this place 2 years ago. Lines etched deeper around his eyes, a new scar splitting his left eyebrow, permanent reminders of his time and captivity. The neighborhood felt like a surreal dream. Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes were gone, replaced by modern landscaping. The Mitchell kids' basketball hoop had vanished from the driveway next door. Even the air smelled different designer flowers instead of the wild honeysuckle that used to grow along his fence. His mind flashed back to his escape, the months of careful observation learning. The guard's patterns slowly working loose the cell. Windows, rusted bars, the rain that had covered his movements, that moonless night, the 3-day tray through hostile territory with nothing but stolen supplies. And iron determination, every step, every decision, every moment of pain had been fueled by one thought: getting back to Emma. The bank visit this morning had been his first shock. The teller's face had gone white. When he presented his ID, her trembling fingers dialing security. "I'm sorry, sir," she'd stammered. But James Carter was declared legally dead. These accounts were closed months ago. That was when he'd known something was wrong. The military would have notified his next of kin of his pal status, unless a child's laughter from a nearby yard yanked him back to the present. Not Emma's laugh. She'd be 14 now, too old for the carefree, giggling of the little girl jumping rope across the street. His little girl had grown up without him, lived 2 years of her life thinking he was dead. The thought propelled him forward up the unfamiliar stone path that had replaced his old concrete walkway. Each step felt like moving through quicksand, his combat boots impossibly heavy on the imported slate. But Jim's finger hesitated over the doorbell, his throat tightening. The brass knocker heat installed. The one Emma used to reach for on tiptoe was gone, replaced by a sleek video intercom system before he could press it. The door swung open. Time stopped. At a teenage girl stood frozen in the doorway. Papers clutched to her chest, tears already streaming down her face. Emma is Emma. The little girl from his memories had grown into a young woman, her dark hair longer, her face losing its childhood roundness. But those eyes, his eyes, were exactly as he remembered them now. Wide with disbelief, Dad. Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. The papers slipped from her grasp, scattering across the porch like fallen leaves. Dad's alive. Jim's heart shattered at the raw pain. In her voice he dropped his duffel bag, arms opening instinctively, but Emma stumbled backward into the foyer. Her retreat felt like a physical blow as she moved. His military-trained eyes caught glimpses of the fallen paper's official letterhead legal jargon, and there in bold black letters that seemed to burn into his retinous petition for adoption, Emma's sweetheart, Hebegan, fighting to keep his voice steady. The words died in his throat as he saw her face crumple, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. They said, Mum said. Emma's words came in gasps. She told everyone you died in the crash. There was a funeral. I threw flowers on your empty casket. The image of his daughter, grieving over a false grave, sent a surge of rage through Jim's body, but he forced it down. Emma didn't need his anger right now. She needed her father. I'm here now, he said softly, taking a careful step forward. I survived the crash, but I was captured. I never stopped fighting to get back to you, princess. Never. Emma swayed slightly, her hand gripping the doorframe. 2 years, she whispered, 2 whole years thinking you were dead. Mum got rid of all your pictures. She said it would help me move on, but I kept one hidden in my diary. I used to talk to it every night, telling you about my day, praying. Somehow you could hear me. Each word was like a knife to Jim's heart. He wanted to crush her in his arms, to promise that nothing would ever separate them again, but something. In Emma's posture kept him back. There was fear mixed with her shock. Not fear of him, he realized, but fear of something else. His eyes dropped to the scattered papers again. Bending down, he picked up one that had landed near his feet. The more he read, the colder his blood ran. Petition for adoption. Peter Holloway. Termination of parental rights. Best interest of the minor child. The words blurred together, but their meaning was crystal clear. Someone had been systematically erasing him from his daughter's knee. Life Pete's been coming around a lot, Emma said. Her voice. Small Mum started dating him last year. He brings me presents, tries to act like he's you. The adoption hearing is tomorrow. Everyone's going to be there. Grandma and Grandpa, Uncle David. All of the Mum said it would give me a real family again. You already have a real family, Jim said, his tone sharper than he intended. He softened it quickly, seeing Emma flinch. You have me, sweetheart. I'm your father. And nothing, no piece of paper. Court hearing. No one can change that, Emma. A sharp voice cut through their reunion, like a blade who's at the door. The click of heels on hardwood preceded Vanessa's appearance, each step a countdown to confrontation. Jim watched his daughter's entire demeanor change, her shoulders hunching, her eyes dropping to the floor. The transformation told him everything he needed to know about the past 2 years. Vanessa Carter hadn't changed. That was Jim's first thought as she rounded the corner into the foyer, if anything. She looked better than ever, her blonde hair expertly styled, her designer dress hugging curves that had always been her weapon of choice. But there was something different in her eyes now, something cold and calculating that made his combat horn instinct scream danger. She froze mid-ep, manicured hand flying to her throat in what he recognized as practice surprise. James. His name fell from her lips like ice. This is unexpected. The perfume that drifted toward him wasn't the same one she'd worn during their marriage. This scent was stronger, more expensive, like everything else about her. Now the Mercedes in the driveway, the renovated house, the designer clothes. She'd been busy during his death. What's going on, Vanessa? Jim kept his voice steady, though the crumpled adoption papers in his hand trembled with suppressed rage. You're trying to terminate my parental rights. Trying. Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched as she recovered her composure, a small, cruel smile played at the corners of her red lips. "Oh, James, it's already done. You were declared legally dead. 8 months ago there was a funeral in everything." She took a step closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood like bullets. "Very moving service by the
way. Everyone said such nice things about you. Emma's SOB cut through the tension. You told me he died in the crash. You said they found his body. Of course I did. Sweetheart." Vanessa's voice dripped with false sympathy as she turned to their daughter. The
way she positioned herself slightly between Emma and Jim wasn't lost on him. It was a tactical move, asserting control. That's what the military told us. And really, what were the chances of survival? I had to think about your future, about giving you stability. Stability. Jim's fingers clenched around the paper, crumpling it further. 2 years of military prison had taught him to control his anger, to channel it into something useful. "You mean like having Pete Holloway adopt her?" The flash in Vanessa's eyes, surprise, quickly masked by calculation, confirmed his suspicion. She hadn't expected him to know about Pete. "How did you—" "I saw the name on the papers." Jim took a step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, the same tone he'd used during interrogations, the one that made hardened guards take a step back. "My divorce lawyer, Vanessa, really. The same man who handled our case. Tell me, how long were you two planning?" "This planning?" Vanessa's laugh was brittle, sharp-edged. "Don't be dramatic, James."
Pete and I only got together after you were gone. He's been wonderful, successful, present, everything. You weren't her eyes, raked over his uniform with disdain. The option is happening tomorrow, and there's nothing you can do about it. Everything
been handled legally. The emphasis on that last word told him everything he needed to know. Pete had used his legal knowledge to manipulate the system, probably calling in favors, expediting paperwork that should have taken months or years. We'll see. About that, Jim turned to Emma, who stood, trembling against the wall. His daughter's face was pale, her eyes darting between her parents, like she was watching a bomb about to explode. "Princess, can you tell me what's been happening?" "Don't answer him." "Emma." Vanessa's command cracked like a whip. "He abandoned us long before that crash. Remember, always choosing the military over his family. And now he thinks he could just walk back in here and destroy everything we've built. That's not true." Emma's voice.
"Rose, stronger now. Dad never abandoned us. You're the one who—" "Enough." Vanessa's hand shot out, grabbing Emma's arm. The gesture was Smuth practiced, a move she'd clearly used before. "Go to your room. Now the adults need to talk." Jim's whole body tensed at
Vanessa's grip on their daughter in the P camp. He learned to read people's hands, the way they moved, what they revealed about intention and history. Vanessa's grip was too familiar, too controlled. How many times had Emma felt that grasp in the past? 2 years, but he forced himself to remain still. He'd seen that looking high-sex wife's eyes before she was ready for him to explode, to give her ammunition toss against him one wrong move, and he'd be playing right in her hands. "It's okay, Emma," he said, softly, letting warmth fill his voice. The same tone he'd used to chase away her childhood nightmares. "Go ahead. We'll talk later." Emma hesitated, tears still flowing. "Promise you won't leave again." "I promise, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Once Emma had disappeared upstairs stairs, Vanessa's facade cracked like thin ice. She moved to the living room, her heels striking a staccato rhythm that echoed through the transformed space. Everything Jim remembered was gone. His leather armchair, the family photos, the military honors he'd earned in their place, stood modern furniture in cold greys and white. Abstract art hanging were family portraits used to be, you think. You could just walk back in here and play. Daddy Vanessa paced the room like a cage predator, her designer dress swishing with each turn. Do you have any idea what we went through, what I went through, what you went through? Jim's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. I spent 2 years being tortured in a pea camp while you were here forging documents and planning to erase me from my daughter's life. Prove it. Vanessa's smile was vicious, triumphant. She gestured around the room. But all the evidence of his absence, prove any of it. Your accounts are frozen, your house is sold, and every legal document shows you're dead. Pete made sure of that. She paused, letting her next words land like precision strikes. Even your family supports the adoption. They'll all better tomorrow, watching Emma get the father she deserves. The mention of his family hit harder than any interrogator fist. Jim's mind raced through the implications. His parents, who'd always supported his military service, his brother David, who'd promised to look after Emma if anything ever happened. To him, they'd all believe Vanessa.
Or worse. They'd known the truth and chosen a side with her anyway. What did you tell them? His voice was quiet, controlled. But Vanessa must have caught something in his tone, because her smile widened, only what they needed to hear. She settled onto
the pristine white couch, crossing her legs with deliberate grace. How you'd grown distant long before the crash. How you'd missed Emma's birthday that last year because of training exercises. How convenient it was that you chose the military over every family event. Her eyes glittered with malice. Your mother was especially understanding. She always worried you were too much like your father, married to the uniform. Instead of your family, my father served his country with honor. Jim growled the words, forcing their way past clenched teeth. And look where that got him. A son who followed in his footsteps right into an early grave. Vanessa examined her manicured nails with studied indifference. At least that's what everyone believed. Your brother, David, took it particularly hard. He's been such a comfort to Emma. And these past 2 years, something in her tone made Jim's blood run cold. The way she said David's name, the slight emphasis on comfort, painted a picture he didn't want to see. What exactly are you saying, Vanessa? She looked up at him through perfectly mascara lashes, her smile now tinged with something like pity. Oh, James, did you really think you were the only Carter man I found interesting, David? And I have grown quite close. He'll be sitting in the front row tomorrow, right beside your parents, watching Pete become Em's legal father. The revelation struck Jim like a physical blow. David's own brother had betrayed him in the worst possible way. The same brother who'd stood as his best man, who'd helped him move into this very house, who'd sworn to protect Emma if anything happened to him. You're lying, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, pieces were falling into place. David's frequent business trips to their city before the divorce, the way he'd always sided with Vanessa during the proceedings, the strange tension at family gatherings.
Vanessa rose from the couch, moving toward him with the grace of a predator who knew her prey was cornered. Check your phone. James call them, see who answers if they answer. At all, Jim's hand moved unconsciously to his pocket where his phone sat.
Like a lead-weight Hetrid calling his parents' number earlier, only to find it disconnected. He'd assumed they'd moved change providers. Now he understood they'd changed their entire lives, written him out of their history as thoroughly as Vanessa had. Why, the question escaped before he could stop it. Why go to all this trouble? You had the divorce. You had primary custody. Why wasn't that enough because you were always there, haunting us? Vanessa's voice hardened in Emma's eyes every time she looked. At old photos in your parent, constant questions about when you'd call next in every military benefit check that reminded me I was still tied to you. She stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming. When that plane went down, it was like a gift, a chance to start fresh, to give Emma the life she deserves with a father who puts her first, who's actually present, Pete Holloway. Jim's voice dripped with contempt. The man who helped you stripped me of my rights during the divorce. Pete understands the value
of family. Vanessa snapped, "It builds. Things, James, create security. All you ever did was destroy our marriage, our stability, Emma's chance at a normal life." Jim stood in silence, absorbing every word, every gesture, every revelation. His millet training
had taught him to gather intelligence, to read between lines, to find weaknesses in enemy defenses, and Vanessa, in her moment of perceived triumph, was giving him everything he needed. Her confidence meant she'd left tracks, the forged documents, the rushed
legal proceedings, the manipulation of his family. It all required coordination, documentation, proof. Pete might be a skilled lawyer, but he was still bound by the system he worked within. There would be records, emails, witnesses. You're right about.
One thing he said, finally, watching confusion flicker across Vanessa's perfect features. I wouldn't want to upset Emma any more today. Triumph blazed in Vanessa's eyes. I'm glad you're being reasonable. I'll have Pete draw up some papers. A formal acknowledgement of the adoption, maybe a generous visitation agreement if you behave. That won't be necessary. Jim picked up his duffel bag, his movements measured and calm, everything he'd learned in captivity, patience, observation, the art of appearing defeated came into play. I trust the legal system will sort everything out. He turned to leave, but Vanessa's voice stopped him at the door. Oh, and James, don't bother trying to contact your family. They've moved on too. Everyone has. Jim didn't respond. He walked down the porch steps, past the manicured lawn and the expensive car, and didn't look back. Let Vanessa think she'd won. Let her celebrate her victory with Pete and David. Let them all believe he was the same man who'd left 2 years ago, a soldier bound by rules and regulations. They had no idea that the man who'd returned was something else entirely. A warrior who'd learned that sometimes victory required fighting outside the rules of engagement. The sun was sitting behind him as he pulled out his phone, scrolling through contact until he found the number. He needed an old military buddy who'd gone into private investigation, another who worked in digital forensics, a third who owed him a life debt from their last deployment. Together, Vanessa thought, she'd orchestrated the perfect ambush, but she'd forgotten the first rule of warfare: never underestimate a cornered soldier. Ian's mind he could still see. Emma's tears still feel the weight of those adoption papers in his hands. Vanessa's smug smile. Pete's name on the documents, David's betrayal, had all fueled a fire inside him that burned hotter than any rage he felt in combat. Tomorrow they would all learn what it meant to betray James Carter. The motel rooms flickering, fluorescent light cast harsh shadows across the scattered papers on Jim's bed. His phone lay in the center, on speaker. As a familiar voice crackled through, Jesus Christ, Jim, when you said you needed help, I didn't expect this level of cluster. Mike Rodriguez. His former reconnaissance officer let out, "A la whistle, your ex-wife really pulled all this off while you were in captivity with help." Jim's voice was granite. He shuffled through the documents. His military contacts had already pulled my own divorce. Lawyer Mike Pete Holloway. He's been playing this game since before the crash. The signatures are definitely forged. Another voice chimed in. Danny Walsh, their old unit's document specialist. Whoever did it was good, but they rushed the job. Look at the termination papers I just sent you. The strokes are mechanical, too perfect, non-natural, VAR variation. Jim pulled up the email on his laptop, studying the highlighted inconsistencies. Can you testify to this in court? Better? Danny's grin was audible. I can prove the documents were created and backdated the metadata. Doesn't lie, brother, they got sloppy with the digital trail. Speaking of trails, M. Cutin, my contact at the county clerk's office, found something interesting. Holloway filed the adoption papers 3 months ago, but he expedited them through Judge Marshall. Guess who plays golf with the judge every Sunday? Jim's hand tightened around his pen. Pete Bingo, and here's where it gets better. Marshall's kid just got a full-ride scholarship to law.
School want to guess which firm's foundation provided it, Holloway and Associates. Jim growled. The pen snapped in his grip, ink staining his fingers. Like blood got it in one. This whole thing stinks of influence peddling. They've got half the county court
in their pocket. Mike paused. But Jim, brother, you need to know this goes deeper than Pete. And Vanessa, Jim's jaw clenched. David, yeah, your brother's been busy, found regular payments from his business account to Vanessa's personal account starting 6
months after your crash. Large payments, Jim, the kind you don't make to your sister-in-law, unless you're sleeping with her. The words tasted like ash. What about my parents? A heavy silence filled the line. Finally, Danny spoke. They've been complicated.
Found mails between your mother and Vanessa, lots of them. Vanessa played them masterfully. Jim told them you contacted her before the crash, said you wanted a clean break from everyone. She had fake emails to back it up. Jim stood pacing the cramped room. His military training had prepared him for enemy tactics for psychological warfare, but this was a different kind of battle entirely. The phone buzzed with a new M message that's from Kelly in digital forensics. Micah said she traced the fake emails. They were created using specialized software, the kind law firms use for document recovery. 3 guesses where that software is registered. Holloway and Associates. Jim and Danny said in unison, we got enough for a criminal case. Mike continued. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy, but Jim, the adoption hearing is tomorrow eve, and with all this evidence, courts move slow. If that adoption goes through, it won't. Jim's voice could have frozen flame. I'm not letting them take my daughter. What's the play, Danny asked. You want us to know, Jim? Cut him off. I need you both to keep digging. Focus on Pete's connection to Judge Marshall. Follow the money trail with David. Document everything. He paused, staring at Emma's school photo on his laptop screen. I'll handle tomorrow myself. Jim Mike's voice carried a warning. Don't do anything stupid, these people. They're not enemy combatants. You can't treat this like a military operation. A cold smile crossed Jim's face. That's exactly what they're counting on, Mike. They think they're dealing with the same man who left 2 years ago, a soldier who follows rules and regulations. He looked at his reflection in the motel window. Harder, leaner, scarred by war and betrayal. They've no idea what I became in that prison camp. The park. 3 blocks from school hadn't changed. Same old oak trees. Same worn benches. Same rusty swings, creaking in the evening. Breeze, Jim Satan, their old bench, the one where he used to help Emma with her math homework, and waited. His phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. On my way, made sure I wasn't followed. 5 minutes later, Emma appeared around the corner, still in her school uniform, her backpack clutched tight against her chest, like armor. Here, Yeez darted nervously as she approached. Dad, her whisper, carried across the empty park. Jim stood slowly, keeping his movements calm and open. It's me, princess. Thank you for coming. Emma crashed into him, her arms wrapping around his waist. With desperate strength, "Mum's going crazy at home," she said into his shirt. "She's been on the phone all day with Pete. And Uncle David, they know you're not going away." "No, I'm not." Jim stroked her hair, noting how she trembled. "But I need your help, Emma. I need to know everything that's happened these past 2 years. Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Where do I start?" "Tell me about the day they told you about the crash. I was at school." Emma sank onto the bench, her fingers picking at a loose thread on her skirt. "Mum picked me up early." She was crying. I'd never seen her cry before, not even during the divorce. "She said there'd been an accident, that your plane went down." Her voice hardened. "But it was all fake, wasn't it? The tears, the grief counseling, everything." Jim sat beside her. "What about Pete? When did he start coming around?" "About 6 months after Mom said he was just helping with legal stuff at first. Then he started showing up for dinner, bringing gifts." Emma's lip curled, expensive ones, like he was trying to buy me. "The worst part was how he'd talk about you, like he was somehow doing you a favor by taking care of us." "And Uncle David," Emma's face darkened. "He changed after you, after we thought you died. Started visiting more, staying late. I caught him kissing Mum in the kitchen once when I confronted her." She said I was imagining things. She looked up at Jim, her eyes haunted. "I wasn't imagining it was I know, sweetheart. You weren't?" Jim fought to keep his voice steady. "What about your grandparents? Grandma and Grandpa visit every Sunday." Now Emma hesitated. "They talk about you differently, like you were troubled, unhappy. Mum showed them emails, said you wanted to leave us even before the crash. I tried to tell them it wasn't true, but they believed her. They said I was too young to understand." Jim's hands clenched. "Emma, I need you to know something. Those emails were fake. Everything they told you about me wanted to leave, it was all lies." I know. Emma's voice was fierce. "I never believed it." "Not really? You promised you'd always come back to me." "And you did." She reached and backpack, pulling out a manila envelope. "That's why I brought these." Jim opened the envelope. Inside were photos, dozens of them, him and Emma at her soccer games, birthday parties, school plays, photos he thought Vanessa had destroyed. "I hid them," Emma explained. "When Mom started throwing out your things, I saved what I could. But there's more." She pulled out a small notebook. I wrote down everything. Dates when Pete visited, phone calls. I overheard time when Uncle David would show up.
Late at night, I knew something was wrong. Even if no one would believe me, pride swelled in Jim's chest. His daughter, his brilliant, observant daughter, had been fighting her own silent war all along. "There's something else." Emma's voice dropped to a
whisper. "Yesterday after you left, I heard Mom and Pete arguing in his home office." Pete was mad, really mad. He said something about loose ends and damage control. Then he made a call to someone named Marshall about moving up the hearing. Jim leaned forward. "Did you hear anything else?" Pete said. "He had everything in his office, safe, something about original documents that could ruin everything if anyone found them." Emma's eyes met his, the safes behind the painting. "In his office, the really modern one with the red squares. I've seen him open it late at night when he thinks everyone's asleep." Jim pulled his daughter close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're amazing. You know that. But Emma, tomorrow at the hearing, you know." She straightened her shoulders, looking so much like the soldier's daughter she was. "I have to pretend. I don't know anything. Act like everything's normal until you're ready. It won't be for long," Jim promised. "But I need you to be brave for just a little while more. Can you do that?" Emma nodded. "Just promise me one thing, anything, when this is over." Her voice wavered. "Them pay all of them, even Uncle David?" Jim cued her face in his hands, seeing in here, yes, the same steel that had kept him alive in that prison camp. "They'll pay." Princess, every last one of them, the security system panel at Holloway in Associates glowed red in the darkness at 47p. Jim studied the keypad, remembering Emma's words. Pete always uses important dates as passwords. Mom's birthday, their anniversary stuff. Like, "That you sure about this?" Mike's voice crackled through Jim's earpiece. Breaking into a law office that's not exactly legal. Warfare neither is forging documents to steal someone's daughter. Jim punched in a sequence of numbers. The panel remained red. They crossed that line. First, he tried another combination, the date of Pete and Vanessa's first public appearance together according to Emma's notebook. The light turned green. "I'm in," Jim whispered, easing the door open. "Keep eye on the street. Security guard makes his rounds every 20 minutes, Mike replied. "You've got 17 before the next," one of the offices. Layout was exactly as Emma had described. Modern art. Lined the walls pretentious pieces that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Jim moved silently past empty cubicles toward the corner office with its mahogany door and gold name plate. Peter Holloway, senior partner. The door was locked, but that hardly mattered. 2 years in a prison camp. It taught him more than just patience inside. Moonlight filtered through floor to ceiling, windows casting shadows across Pete's massive desk. Family photos covered one-wall photos that made Jim's blood boil. Pete with Emma at her school play, Pete teaching Emma to ride a bike, Pete and Vanessa at charity gala. Perfect smiles. For the cameras, they've been building their live piece by piece, photo by photo, the painting with red squares. Jim muttered, scanning the walls. They an abstract monstrosity that probably cost more than his military pension behind it, just as Emma had said, was a wall-safe 12 minutes. Mike warned that Jim's fingers moved. Over the safe's keypad, what would a man like Pete choose? Not family birthdays, he wants something less obvious. For his private safe, professional achievements, maybe the date. Pete made partner. The safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, USB drives and a laptop. Jim worked quickly, photographing everything with a specialized camera. Mike had provided adoption papers, emails, bank statements, the evidence of their conspiracy laid bare. Then he saw it, a folder marked Carter. Original documents inside were the real papers. Not the forged ones they'd filed with the court, but the original showing Jim's active duty status, his per-classification, his unrevoked parental
"Rights, those bastards," he breathed, photographing each page. 7 minutes. Jim, he was about to close the safe when something else caught his eye, a small recorder, the kind lawyers use for dictation. He pressed play, keeping the volume low. The Pete's voice
filled the room. Memo regarding James Carter. Situation: Judge Marshall has agreed to expedite adoption proceedings in exchange for consideration of his son's law school application. David Carter continues to cooperate, though his emotional involvement with Vanessa could prove problematic. Recommend increasing his monthly payments to ensure continued compliance. Got you, Jim whispered, slipping the recorder into his pocket. 3 minutes time to go. Jim restored everything exactly as he'd found it, leaving no trace of his visit. As he stepped back into the hallway, a new voice crackled through his earpiece. "Danny, Jim, we've got movement. Black Mercedes just turned onto the street." Jim froze. "Pete, and he's not alone, your brother's with him." Jim K. jaw clenched.
Of course, David would be here, the loyal lapdog following Pete's commands. How long? 30 seconds, maybe less, Jim. If they catch you, they won't. Jim moved swiftly through the darkness, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. He could hear voices now approaching. The building's entrance. I can't believe he had the nerve to show up. David's voice drifted through the door after everything he put Vanessa through. Focus on tomorrow. Pete's reply was sharp. Once the adoption's final, he'll have no legal standing.
Judge Marshall ushered me the key, scraped in the lock. Jim slipped around the corner just as the door opened, pressing himself against the wall in the shadows. Pete and David passed within feet of him, neither noticing the silent figure in the darkness. Security guards approaching from the south. Mike warned, "You're about to be boxed in." Jim waited until Pete and David disappeared into the conference room, then moved the guard's flashlight beam, swept the corridor behind him as he reached the emergency exit. The alarm would have sounded if Mike hadn't disabled it hours ago. 1 minute later, Jim sat in his car 3 blocks away, examining his photos on a laptop. "Did you get what you needed?" Mike asked. "More than enough." Jim's voice was cold with satisfaction. "Pete's been recording everything, every bribe, every conspiracy, every move they made. While I was gone, he thought he was protecting himself, but instead he handed you a weapon. Better." Jim started the car. He handed me Justice Kelly Martinez's apartment. Looked more like a command center than a home. Multiple monitors covered her desk, each displaying different aspects of Pete Holloway's digital life. The former military intelligence officer turned cybersecurity expert hadn't changed much. Same intense focus, same ability to see patterns in chaos. "Your lawyer friend got sloppy," Kelly said, fingers flying across her keyboard. He thought deleting emails would cover his tracks amateur move. She pulled up a series of recovered messages on the main screen. "Look at this correspondence from 8 months ago." Jim leaned forward, reading aloud. "Need death. Certificate expedited. Judge Marshall can help. Standard consideration applies. Translate bribed a judge to declare you dead without a body." Kelly highlighted. Another mail. "Here's the response from Marshall. My son's application needs special attention. Handle it personally." Mike whistled low. "That's explicit no. Plausible deniability. That gets better." Kelly opened another window, found a whole email chain. "Between Pete and David, your brother was running interference with your parents, feeding them Vanessa's story about you wanting to abandon the family. But look at the timestamps. These conversations started before your crash." Jim's hands grew the back of Kelly's chair. "They were planning this before I went down. Looks that way." David was already sleeping with Vanessa. Pete was laying groundwork for the adoption. The crash just accelerated their timeline. Kelly pulled up a spreadsheet. "Here's the money. Trail, regular payments from Pete's firm to an offshore account, then back to Judge Marshall through a scholarship foundation. Similar pattern with David's consulting fees for services never rendered. Classic laundering." Mike observed, "But why keep records?"
At all because Pete doesn't trust any of them. Jim's voice was hard. "Those recordings we found in his safe, he's been documenting everything as insurance. If anyone turned on him, he could burn them all." "Smart play," Kelly admitted, "except he never planned on you coming back." She turned in her chair, facing Jim. "This is enough to end all of their careers. Pete, Marshall, David, they'll all face criminal charges. But Jim," she hesitated, "using illegally obtained evidence could backfire if they can prove how we got these files. We don't need to prove anything in court." Jim cut in. "We just need to stop that adoption hearing long enough for a proper investigation." "What's the play?" Mike asked. Jim pulled out his phone, showing them Emma's text from
"An hour ago, Pete's called an early meeting at the courthouse 8A.
Before the hearing. Everyone will be there, Pete. Vanessa, David, my parents, Judge Marshall. One big happy family planning their final victory. Perfect timing for an ambush." Mike noted, military training kicking in. Exactly. Jim straightened his expression.
Cold, Kelly. Can you prepare packets, everything we've found, the emails, financial records, transcripts of Pete's recordings, one copy for each player in this game? Kelly nodded. Give me an hour. What about your parents? Mike's voice was gentle. This will destroy them too. Learning how, David and Vanessa manipulated them. They chose to believe lies about their own son. Jim's voice held no warmth. They didn't even try to verify Vanessa's story, just accepted that I'd abandoned my daughter. He shook his.
Head no, they need to face what they've done, all of them do. Kelly's fingers paused over her keyboard. Jim, what about Emma? She'll bear the two. Seeing all this come out, it could traumatize her. Emma's stronger than anyone knows. Pride crept into Jim's tone.
She's been gathering intelligence on them for 2 years, keeping records, staying alert. He pulled out her notebook. My daughter never stopped fighting tomorrow. She'll see that her faith was worth it. We should move soon. Mike checked his watch. Need to get in position. Before dawn wait, Kelly pulled up one final email. There's something else you need to see. A message from Vanessa to Pete sent right after they learned you were alive. She highlighted a section. Read this. Jim leaned in, his expression darkening as he read Vanessa's words. If he ruins this for us, there are other ways to handle him. Your old client, Romano, still owes you favors. One phone call, they're planning contingencies, Mike said quietly. If the legal route fails, let them try. Jim's smile was razor sharp. 2 years in a P camp taught me more about survival than their pet criminals could ever know. He straightened, checking his own weapon. Time to end this, Kelly. Get those packets ready. Mike called Danny. I want him in position with a camera tomorrow morning. We're going to give the county courthouse a show they'll never forget. Dawn painted the motel room, walls in shades of grey, as Jim laid out his uniform on the bed. Not his combat fatigues, his full dress, blues every metal, and accommodation in place. The uniform told its own story. Purple Heart Bronze Star, Combat Action Badge, each one earned with blood and sacrifice, each one a testament to the man he become. His phone bust. Danny's text was brief. In position. Courthouse security. Camera feeds accessed. We see everything. Another message, this one from Kelly. Evidence packets. Ready. Digital copies. Backed up on 3 separate servers. They can't bury this. The final text came from Emma. Mum's acting weird. Keeps making phone calls. In her room, Pete was here late last night with Uncle David. Something's wrong, Jim reply. Was immediate. Stay alert. Trust. No one remember the signal. If you need help, a knock at his door brought Mike dressed in a sharp suit that barely hid his military bearing. Perimeter set. Kelly's got eyes on Al. Approaches to the courthouse. Danny's people are in place. He studied Jim's expression, having second thoughts about exposing them. Never. Jim fastened his final medal, but I keep thinking about Emma's text. Vanessa's planning something. The Rano threat more than that. Jim pulled out Pete's recorder, playing the last entry they'd found. Listen. Pete's voice filled the room. Final contingency plan in place. If Carter becomes problematic, Romano's people will ensure he doesn't reach the courthouse. Clean, quick, untraceable. Vanessa's approved the expense. David's handling the transfer through his business accounts. Marshall has guaranteed any investigation will be cursory at best. Mike's expression hardened. They're planning a hit that's crossing a line. Even Pete should know better than to cross. Pete's desperate. They all. Jim checked his weapon one final time before securing it in his shoulder holster. 2 years planning the perfect crime building. Their perfect little family. And now it's all falling apart. You could still handle this. Legally, Mike suggested, take the evidence to the FBI, let them. Jim's voice was, steal. They tried to steal. My daughter tried to erase me from her life. Now they're plotting my murder. He turned to face his friend. This ends today in that courthouse with all of them together. I want to see their faces. When their world burns down, Mike nodded slowly. Kelly finished analyzing Vanessa's phone records, multiple calls to a burner phone in the last 12 hours. If Romano's people are in play, let them. Come, Jim smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. 2 years. In that camp taught me to survive worse than street thugs. Besides, he patted the evidence packet in his briefcase. We have our own insurance. Speaking of insurance, Mike pulled out a USB drive. Kelly found something interesting in Pete's deleted files. Videos of Vanessa from before your crash. She was meeting David at a hotel. Pete had her followed, gathered blackmail material on both of them, but never used it, saving it, probably keeping everyone in line. Mike handed over the drive. Like you said, Pete. Doesn't trust any of them. Jim pocketed the drive. Time 7:15. They'll be gathering at the courthouse now. Mike checked his phone. Danny confirms Judge Marshall arrived early. Vanessa and Pete just pulled up. David's parking his car. My parents already inside 'em too. Jim stood before the mirror, adjusting his uniform. One final time, the man who stared back wasn't the same one who kissed his daughter goodbye 2 years ago. That man had believed in rules, in the system, in family loyalty. This man knew better. Jim's voice was quiet. If anything goes wrong, if Romano's people interfere, Em is covered. Mike assured him, Kelly's got a team watching her. One signal from you and we get here out. But Jim, he gripped his friend's shoulder. Be careful in there.
These people, they're cornered animals. Now, no telling what they might do. I'm counting on that. Jim picked up his briefcase. Cornered animals make mistakes. And I want them to see it coming. Want them to feel what Emma felt watching their whole world
disappear piece by piece. The evidence should be enough, Mike said. Once Marshall sees those financial records. This isn't just about evidence. Jim moved toward the door. It's about justice, real. Justice, not the kind Pete and Marshall trade over golf games. He checked his watch. 7:30, time to go. They stepped out into the morning sun. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade a monument to the law. Pete had twisted to his own ends. Soon those steps would witness another kind of justice, the kind forged in combat, tempered by betrayal, and delivered by a father who crawled through hell to save his daughter. You know what Emma said to me in the park? Jim's voice carried across the parking lot. She said, make them pay, all of them. My 14-year-old daughter. Mike, they forced her to grow up too fast. Taught her about betrayal when she should have been learning about trust. Mike fell in a step beside him. Then let's finish this for Emma. Jim nodded. Once his expression set, like granite in his mind, he could see them all gathering in that courthouse. Vanessa, with her perfect mask. Pete, with his legal documents. David, with his practice, lies. His parents, choosing willful blindness over truth. Judge Marshall, thinking his corruption would stay buried. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to meet a force of nature they never calculated. For a father's love, hardened by war, strengthened by survival, and fueled by a burning need for justice. The county courthouse house's marble halls echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations as Jim Carter stood in the shadows, watching through the ornate wooden doors. Of 3 he could see them, gathering the conspirators who tried to steal his life. Pete. Holloway held court at the front, his expensive suit a sharp contrast to the public defender Warren Blazer. In the next case, he was showing something on his phone to Judge Marshall. Both men laughing like old friends, sharing a private joke, all players. Accounted for, Mike's voice, M murmured through Jim's earpiece. Danny's got eyes on Romano's people. 3 of them lobby level. Vanessa just arrived. She's with your brother Jim. Watch them. ENT Vanessa, in a cream designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. David hovering at her elbow, like an anxious. Shadow, his brother's face was drawn nervous. He kept checking his phone, glancing at the doors. Your parents are in the front row. Mike continued Emma's with them through the doorway. Jim could see his daughter. She sat, rigid hands clasped in her lap, wearing the blue dress she'd chosen for what was supposed to be her adoption day. Her eyes kept darting to the back of the courtroom, searching. Kelly confirms the evidence packets
Are in place. Mike said, one under each seat where you marked. They won't see them until they sit down. Jim adjusted his uniform cuff. Romano's people still in position, but they won't try anything inside at the courthouse. Too many witnesses, too much security. They're not here to stop me. Jim's voice was cold. The insurance, Pete's backup plan. If the legal route fails, the Baith entered the courtroom speaking quietly to Judge Marshall. The older man nodded, checking his watch with an impatient gesture.
Showtime, Mike murmured. You ready? Jim thought of Emma's tears in the park, of Vanessa's smug smile in their old home, of Pete's recorded threat. He thought of 2 years in a prison camp, surviving on the promise of seeing his daughter again. More than ready, he stepped out of the shadows. Moving toward the courtroom doors, his medals caught the morning light, each one a testament to battles fought and won. This would be his final war, not for country this way, but for something far more precious. The first person to notice him was the court reporter, her fingers freezing over her stenotype. Then heads began to turn, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. Pete's laugh cut off mid-sound. Ash saw Jim in the doorway. No Vanessa's whisper carried in the sudden silence. You can't be
Here, this is a closed proceeding. Jim's smile was razor-sharp. Actually, I can when it concerns my daughter's future. I have every right to be here. He moved forward, each step measured and deliberate. Isn't that right, Judge Marshall's? The judge's face
had gone pale, his eyes darting between Jim and Pete. This is highly irregular, Mr. Holloway. You assured me it's fine, Your Honor. Pete's recovery was smooth, professional. Only someone watching closely would see the sweat beating at his temples. Captain, Carter is simply confused about the proceedings. Perhaps if we could have a brief recess. No recess. Jim's voice filled the courtroom. No more delays, no more back deals. Here ached the front, turning to face them all. It's time we had some truth in this courthouse, Dad. Emma's voice trembled with hope and fear. It's okay, Princess. Jim kept his eyes on Pete. Everything's going to be clear very soon. Why don't you all check under your seats? I left something for each of you. The rustle of papers filled the
air as they found the packets. Jim watched their faces as they opened them, saw the blood drained from Pete's face, the tremor in David's hands, the way Judge Marshall's jowls began to quiver. This, Pete's voice cracked. This is inadmissible illegally.
Obtained like the forged documents you use to declare me dead. Jim's words cut like a blade, or maybe like the offshore accounts you've been using to bribe Judge Marshall, those payments for his son's law school. Very generous of your firm, Marshall. Surged to his feet. I will not sit here and listen to these baseless accusations. They're not baseless, Your Honor. Jim held up Pete's recorder. In fact, they're recorded in Pete's own voice. Would you like to hear how much your son's future cost, Vanessa? was the first to recover, her mask of sophistication cracking as she read through the evidence packet. These emails, their private correspondence. You had no right. No right. Jim's laugh was cold, like you had no right to forge my signature, to fake my death, to try to erase me from my daughter's life. He turned to the judge, Your Honor, would you please read page 4, the part about your son's scholarship? Marshall's hands shook as he flipped pages. The courtroom fell silent, watching his face turned from pale to ash-grey. While you're at it, Jim continued, David, why don't you explain to our parents about those monthly payments from Pete's firm, the ones that started right after you began sleeping with my wife? Their mother gasped. David, what is he talking about? David surged to his feet. This is ridiculous. Jim's obviously fabricated. Play the recording. Pete cute in, his voice tight. Go ahead, Jim, play it all. Let everyone hear how you obtained this evidence illegally, actually. Jim smiled. I don't need to play anything. You're going to tell them yourself? Or should I ask Romano's men in the lobby what they're being paid to do if this hearing doesn't go your way? Pete's face went slack in the gallery. Emma sat forward, her eyes wide. What's he talking about? Pete. Vanessa's voice had lost its polish, turning shrill. You said you'd handle everything, handle it, like you handled the forged death certificate, Jim pressed, or like you handled Judge Marshall's son's sudden academic success. Marshall stood. Abruptly, this proceeding is adjourned. Sit down, Your Honor. Jim's command carried the weight of military authority. Unless you want the state bar to hear about your golf course deals with Pete, how many other cases have you expedited? You can't threaten. A judge, Pete began, but Jim cut him off. Like you threatened me through Romano. Jim pulled out his phone. Kelly, go ahead. The courtroom screens flickered to life, displaying security camera footage from Pete's office the night before. The audio was crystal clear. Pete's voice, if he shows up tomorrow, Romano's people will handle it. Clean, quick, David. Jesus, Pete. We're talking about my brother, Pete. Your brother, who's about to ruin everything we built. Think of Emma. Vanessa, do it whatever it costs. I won't let him take her from me. The color drained from Pete's face in the gallery. Jim's mother began to sob. Mom, Emma's voice cut through the tension you were going to have. Dad killed Vanessa, spun toward her daughter Emma. Sweetie, you don't understand. Everything I did was for us. No, Emma stood, her voice stronger. Everything you did was for yourself. Dad's the only one who ever really fought for me. The BFF's radio crackled. A voice reported 3 armed men being arrested in the lobby. Romano's insurance policy.
Neutralize before they could act. This isn't just about the adoption anymore. Jim addressed the court. We have conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder. He locked eyes with Pete. How many years do you think that adds up to? Want to ask your friend the judge.
Away he might be facing his own charges. Marshall slumped in his chair. Decades of judicial authority crumbling under the weight of exposed corruption. You plan this. Materialized his lawyer's mind, finally catching up all of it. The evidence, the timing. Romano's men. I learned a few things about strategy. In that P camp, Jim's voice was steel, like how to recognize a trap. You were all so focused on erasing me, you never considered I might be several moves ahead. The courthouse doors burst open as federal agents flooded the room. Jim recognized Mike among them, now wearing his FBI badge openly. Peter Holloway, Mike announced. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and judicial corruption. He nodded to his team. Take them all. Pete's professional demeanor finally cracked. This is entrapment. He broke into my office. Actually, Mike cut in. We had a warrant signed by a federal judge. after we presented evidence of your conspiracy to commit murder." He smiled coldly. "Those conversations with Rano, all recorded. Turns out he's been working with us for months." Vanessa lunged toward Emma, but Jim stepped between them. "Don't even think about it. She's my daughter." Vanessa's mascara ran as tears streaked her perfect makeup. "Everything I did was to protect."
Protect her. Emma stood, her voice ringing through the chaos. "You lied to me every single day, told me Dad abandoned us, tried to make me call Pete father, and now." Her voice broke. "You were going to have Dad killed, Emma. Please, Vanessa begged you don't."
I understand perfectly." Emma moved to stand beside Jim. "Dad survived a P camp to come back to me. You survived nothing. You just lied and manipulated and destroyed everything good in our lives as agents. LED pet, way in handcuffs." He turned. "To David, call my partner. He'll handle the—" "Your partner's already been arrested," Mike informed him, "along with Judge Marshall's son and half the county clerk's office. This conspiracy went deep, but not deep enough to hide from a federal investigation. Marshall seemed to age decades in moments. My reputation. My career is over," Jim finished, "just like your son's legal career. Amazing how quickly a prestigious law school rends admission when they learn it was bought with bribes." David tried to slip toward the door, but two agents blocked his path. "Jim, brother, please, I can explain." Explain what? Jim's voice could have frozen fire. "How you betrayed your own brother, slept with his wife, helped steal his daughter." He stepped closer, watching David
Flinch. Or maybe explain a money laundering, the offshore accounts, the fake documents you helped create. "I loved her," David whispered. "Vanessa and we save it for your trial." Jim turned away as agents cuffed his brother. "I'm sure the jury will love hearing how you plotted to murder your own brother." Their parents sat shell-shocked in the gallery. Their mother reached out as Jim passed. "Jimmy, we didn't know about David and Vanessa, about the murder plot. But you knew I was alive." Jim cut her off deep down.
"You knew. You just chose to believe Vanessa's lies because it was easier than asking questions." He looked at his father. "You were a soldier once. Did you really think I'd abandon my daughter?" His father's face crumpled. "Son, I'm not your son anymore." Jim's words fell like stones. "You lost that right when you chose to support the people trying to steal. My daughter, as federal agents, led the conspirators away." The once bustling courtroom fell silent. Only the Carter family remained, the broken pieces
Of what had once been whole. Emma stood beside Jim, her hand clutched in his, while their former family members faced the consequences of their choices. "I want to talk to them," Emma said quietly. "Before they take Mom away, I need to say something." Jim studied
his daughter's face, seeing the steel beneath her tears. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Emma squared her shoulders. "I've been quiet for 2 years, doing what they wanted, pretending everything was fine. Not anymore." Vanessa waited by the BFF's desk, handcuffs glinting. On her wrists, her perfect appearance had crumbled, mascara streaked, hair disheveled, designer dress wrinkled, but her eyes still held that calculating look. As Emma approached, "Emma, baby." Vanessa began. "Everything I did was for yourself." Emma cut her off.
"Every lie, every manipulation, every time you made him feel guilty for missing Dad." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "You know what the worst part was? Watching you smile at his funeral. A few you knew was fake. You stood there crying these perfect tears while I felt like my world was ending. I protected you." Vanessa's voice cracked. "Your father abandoned us long before that crash. The military always came first. Know your ambitions came first." Emma's words cut like razors. "Dad missed one birthday. Because of training, you missed every moment of my life that wasn't perfect enough to post on social media." She pulled out her phone, showing a photo. Remember this, my soccer championship? You said you couldn't come because of a charity event, but really, you were with Uncle David at some hotel.
Vanessa flinched. How did you? I've known for months. Pete's not the only one who can gather evidence. Emma's laugh was bitter. Did you really think I didn't see what was happening? The secret phone calls, the way you and Uncle David looked at each other, how Pete suddenly started buying me expensive gifts after Dad's death. Emma pleased Vanessa. Tried to reach for her daughter, but the handcuff stopped her. We can still be a family once this misunderstanding. Emma's voice rose. You tried to have Dad killed. You were going to let Romano's men murder him just to keep your perfect new life. She stepped back, wiping angry tears. You're not my mother anymore. A real mother would die to protect her child's father, not try to kill him across the room. David watched the exchange, his own handcuffs preventing him from intervening. Jim approached his brother, seeing the fear flash in David's eyes. Happy now, Jim's voice was quiet, controlled. You got what you wanted, Vanessa, my housemate.
Life, how does it feel knowing it's all built on lies? Jim, please, David's voice shook. You don't understand what it was like watching you have everything, the perfect wife, the perfect daughter, the military hero everyone admired. I was always in your shadow, so you decided to steal my life instead of building your own. Jim's laugh was hollow. You could have had anything. David, a career, a family success. Instead, you chose to destroy mine. I loved her, David whispered. Vanessa and it started before.
Your crash. We never meant to get caught. Jim finished to have your murder plot exposed, to face consequences for once in your privileged life. He leaned closer, voice dropping. 2 years in that P camp, I had one thought keeping me alive. Getting back. To my daughter, you had one job: protect her. If anything happened to me, instead, you betrayed everything. Family, honor, basic human decency. Their parents approached cautiously, their mother's tears falling freely. Please, she begged. We're still family. We can fix this. Fix what? Jim turned to them. Fix how you believed I'd abandoned my child. Fix how you supported the woman who tried to erase me from Emma's life. Fix how you stood by while your other son seduced my wife and plotted my murder. We thought. His father struggled for words. The emails, the evidence Vanessa showed us. You thought it was easier to believe lies than ask questions, Jim finished. Easier to accept a convenient story than fight for the truth. He straightened his uniform. Well, now you have your truth. How does it taste? As the last police car pulled away from the courthouse, carrying Vanessa and Pete to their well-deserved fate. Jim stood with Emma on the stone steps. The morning sun had burned away, the fog leaving, the sky a perfect clear blue. What happens now? Emma asked, her voice small but steady. She still held his hand, as if afraid he might disappear again. Jim squeezed her finger, ERS, gently. Now we go home. Emma looked up at him. Our old house is sold. I know, Jim smiled, but I've been busy this past week. Mike helped me find a place, a new house just for us. It's not far from your school, has a big backyard. He paused. That is, if you want to live with me. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different, tears of relief, of joy, more than anything. Mike approached, tucking his FBI badge away. Everything's secured. Pete and Vanessa are being processed downtown. David's headed to federal detention. Judge Marshall's agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration during sentencing. The evidence packets, Jim asked. Copies are already with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Kelly's sending everything to the State Bar Association and Judicial Review Board. Mike grinned. Pete's law firm is imploding as we Speak seems a lot of his other cases are being reviewed. Now Emma tugged Jim's sleeve. What about Mom's threats? Romano's people already handled. Mick assured her. Romano flipped on Pete as soon as we showed him. The evidence turns out he wasn't. Keen on adding attempted murder of a decorated veteran to his record, he checked his phone. Kelly's team is dismantling their financial network as we speak. By sunset, every account, every asset will be frozen. Jim nodded, and my military benefits being restored. Right now, fullback. Pay plus compensation for the fraudulent death declaration. Mike's expression softened. The JAG office is personally overseeing. It seems they take a dim view of civilians trying to erase a palicsistent's dad. Emma's voice drew their attention. She pointed across the courthouse plaza where Jim's parents stood uncertainly by their car. They want to talk to you. Jim's jaw tightened, but Emma squeezed his hand. They were wrong, she said quietly. Really wrong, but they're still our family, and they chose us in the end. After a long moment, Jim nodded. They walked over together, father and daughter. United, his mother stepped forward, age and grief evident in her face. We don't deserve forgiveness, she began. No, Jim agreed, you don't, but we'd like a chance, his father added, to be grandparents again, to make amends. Jim looked down at Emma, seeing his own strength reflected in her eyes. That's not my decision anymore. Emma's old enough to choose who she wants in her life. He met his parents' gaze, but if she gives you a chance, you better not waste it. Emma studied her grandparents for a long moment. Sunday dinners, she finally said. Once a month, we can start there. Relief flooded their faces. His mother stepped forward as if to hug them, but stopped herself, understanding that trust would need to be built. Slowly we should go. Jim said the new house is waiting as they walked to his car. Emma suddenly laughed what Jim asked. I just remembered something. She pulled out her notebook. The one where she documented everything, all those times Mom and Pete were scheming. They never knew I was gathering intelligence. Just like you taught me before you deployed. Pride swelled in Jim's chest. That's my girl. Always thinking ahead, like father, like daughter. Emma's smile faded slightly. Dad, are you really never going to forgive them, any of them? Jim helped her into the car, considering his answer carefully. Forgiveness is complicated, Princess. Right now I'm focused on our future, not their past choices. You started the engine, they made their decisions, now they face the consequences. Good, Emma said firmly, because I don't forgive them either. Not yet, maybe not ever. Jim pulled away from the courthouse, watching in the rearview mirror as the building shrank into the distance. 2 years of pain, betrayal, and separation fell away. With each mile, you know what I missed most. In that camp, he asked as they drove toward their new home. What our talks just like this, you telling me about your day, sharing your thoughts, he smiled. You've grown so much, Emma, stronger, smarter, braver than I could have imagined. I'm so proud of you. Emma leaned against his shoulder like she used to do on long car rides when she was small. I always knew you'd come back for me, Dad. Always. The sun was setting as they pulled into the driveway of their new house. It wasn't as large as their old
one, but there's a fresh start, unburdened by painful memories. Home, Jim said softly. Emma took his hand as they walked to the front door. Home, she agreed. Behind them, the day shadows lengthened, taking with him the last remnants of Vanessa's schemes.
Pete's corruption and David's betrayal tomorrow would bring new challenges, custody arrangements, to formalize legal proceedings, to attend a life to rebuild. But for now, a father and daughter stood on their porch together again, unbreakable. And in the quiet of the evening, Emma whispered the words Jim had crossed through hell to hear. I always knew you'd come back for me, Dad. Always, Jim replied, and this time it wasn't just a promise, it was their future. If you liked the video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon.